Welcome, everyone. This is Progressive Labor Party's The Working Class Fights Racism and State Violence presentation on June 7th, 2020. We're going to start off with a little video to get the show rolling.
How you doing? Good. So, where do you live? Live in Minneapolis. How have you been a part of the protest?
Past couple days.
How's that been?
I like what I'm seeing. I had a lot of destruction. You feel me? A lot of people coming together for a common purpose. Like all that peaceful shit don't work. You know what I'm saying? Most people doing the peaceful shit for years. That shit don't work. When America don't want to fight, when America want to change shit, what they do? They go to war. They fight. So that's what we gotta do. We gotta keep doing the same shit. Keep fighting. You know what I'm saying?
How do you feel about people coming from who aren't from Chicago or who aren't from Minneapolis coming out here?
I like it. Anybody from anywhere come out here, turn up. This is a thing in America. This ain't just Minnesota, Chicago, or LA. That's everywhere. You know what I'm saying? So anybody come anywhere and do your thing. Folks, everybody gotta come together.
Anything else you want to add?
Shit, keep this shit going. Don't let it stop because the police saying they gonna do this. They gonna bring the National Guard. They gonna do this. Keep that shit going. You feel me? Y'all can't be scared. There's more people in the population than it is police. Police is a job. People sign up for that shit. It's a certain amount of people in the police. There's way more population. So y'all can't get scared. Y'all gotta keep fighting.
All right. Thanks.
That is a young worker that PL members met when we traveled to Minneapolis. My name is Alice, and I am a member of Progressive Labor Party. Welcome to this program on racist police violence, working class rebellions, capitalism, and the need for revolutionary change in our society. Progressive Labor Party is a communist organization dedicated to the fight against racism and to an egalitarian communist world, run by the working class, the 99%. The imperative for revolutionary structural change is once again revealed by the persistent violence on Black men and women who we grieve for now: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many others, as well as the devastating deaths and job loss from the COVID-19 pandemic. These deadly inequities and deaths hurt all of us, some much more than others. Reforms and voting do not cure the pandemic of racism, unemployment, disease, and poverty, but a communist society that improves on past mistakes can. This is the second in a series of programs put on by PLP to discuss revolutionary organizing and analysis. The first one focused on healthcare under capitalism and communism. The program can be accessed here on Crowdcast, and we will post the link in the chat box. Upcoming programs will focus on essential workers and economic issues. The program on economics is set for next Sunday, June 14th. Today's program will begin with reportbacks from the front lines of the protests and worker rebellions in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Northwest Indiana. We'll then hear from the two PL members on the role police play in maintaining capitalism and the need for an organized party to turn rebellion into revolution. This will be followed by a discussion with comments and questions from you all. Please use the chat box to post questions, and we will also post contact information if you would like to connect with us and join a party study group. If you get kicked off or lose audio or video, try to refresh the page first. If that does not work, then just log back in. This program is being transcribed, and Spanish subtitles will be added to the program once it is over for people to watch later. You can post questions in Spanish in the chat, and we will translate them for the speakers to answer.
Este programa se va a transcribir a español para poder verlo después con los títulos en español. Puedes escribir tus preguntas en español en el chat y las vamos a traducir para que los oradores las contesten.
Thank you for attending. Our first speaker is KJ.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm KJ. I'm a member of the PLP, Progressive Labor Party. I'm going to give a short report on our trip to Minneapolis. First of all, I want to say that the trip to Minneapolis was definitely a success. Many of the locals that we spoke to agreed with the party line. First, when we went to our main rally at Wells Fargo, it was a burnt down Wells Fargo bank. We were towards the back of the actual rally, but when our comrades started getting on the bullhorn, they started to gain a lot of attention from those who were rallying. Of a crowd of about 500 or so, we started to get people from the main rally to start gathering around us. When we began the march after curfew, so we started the march after curfew. The curfew in Minneapolis, they had an 8 p.m. curfew, so we began our march after curfew at 8 p.m. And we started to march down one of the main roads in the city. Maybe 7 or 8 blocks into the march, we got maybe 7 or 8 blocks into the march. The police, they drove through the center of the march. It was interesting to see. When they drove through the middle, they split up our crowd of about 500, and they got out with tear gas, rubber bullets, and they started to basically attack the crowd. During that time, I thought we were gonna I thought that we were going to not attack. I thought that we were gonna basically get it in with the police. I thought that we were all gonna. I thought it was going up right then and there. When the police split up the march, the people who were on our side of the split, all of the workers that were on our side of the split, they began to look for the party as leadership. And that was really amazing to see that since everybody agreed with our party line, that they looked to us for leadership, and we were actually foreign to the land. So that let me know that the more networking that we do, more people will be, or more workers, I should say, will be in line with the party. After we decided to continue marching for a few miles further, we decided to make a retreat because we wanted to be able to fight another day. At that moment, it was better to retreat so that we could regroup and reorganize so that we could continue to press on. At this time, I believe party member Glenn will connect. And so, yeah.
Alrighty. First, I want to give a shout out to everybody that's here, everybody that's been involved in working class struggle this past week. I'm sure everybody in our own cities and things like that have been really fighting really hard. So here in Chicago, I think workers took to the streets in response and in solidarity with the working class of Minneapolis. And then that turned into solidarity with the working class in New York and Atlanta and DC and all these other places. The situation in Chicago before the rebellion was a situation of occupation, a situation where Black workers made up 70% of the deaths due to COVID, a situation where a lot of workers weren't getting their needs met, just basic needs like rent, right? And so last Saturday, workers rebelled and fought back, and ever since there's been a week of fight back, a week of intensity, a week of workers being in the street, whether it be on the west side of Chicago, whether it be on the south side of Chicago, whether it be in the face of the National Guard riding their tanks through our neighborhoods. Folks have not been afraid. Folks have been out there, and folks have been very receptive to our message when we come to workers with the message of communism, a message that we can't defund the police, a message that we can't decrease their presence in our school, that all of those things are not going to get us the society that we need. Workers have really responded to that and been extremely receptive. Here in Chicago, in lieu of the rebellions, the city and also the police tried their best to pit workers against each other. So You know, Chicago is a big gang city, known for having a lot of gangs, and so the police use that to try to stoke up racism between the Latinx community and Black workers as well. And in the midst of Black workers still rebelling and fighting back, Latinx workers organized demonstrations in their neighborhoods to show that, you know, we will not let the CPD or the mayor, we won't let these folks divide our communities, that we're stronger together. And when we unite and fight, we can do whatever we want. We can have the society that it is that we need. So I think that's just, you know, kind of a report from Chicago, right? A lot of these different things are starting to take the form of defunding the police, but as communists, as revolutionary communists, we have to understand that it doesn't matter if they defund the police, that the police are still going to figure out a way to do their job, and that's to be a tool of the state and to suppress us. So we have to organize in our neighborhoods, on our block, in our schools, and fight for a communist society. We're going to have a comrade from Indiana, XO.
Hello? Can I be heard?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So Northwest Indiana has a history of extreme racial and class divide. So people in different towns, more so like 5-10 minutes away, it seems like we live very different lives due to capitalism historically and purposefully separating people by race. But at the end of the day, all workers still get oppressed, still experience class oppression. The current multiracial upbringings and protests help us realize our own strength, that the bosses don't have as strong of a hold to us as they thought they did. Today, I want to talk about the different ways cops treated the workers who were doing the same thing, you know, speaking out against racism and capitalism, terror, and how each thing was met differently, how each group of people was met differently. The ones in Hammond, so there was one that took place at 6 p.m. In the border between Hammond and Munster. One took place where it was mostly white workers, working class. There was no cops in riot gear. There was no mace involved. The cops rolled by without stopping. The only cop that did stop was telling us when curfew was and that he would extend it an extra hour. So overall, a very pleasant experience. We actually stayed 20 minutes after that. I'm pretty sure everyone went home thinking that the city really cared about and like felt protected and heard. But in the same city, same day, same exact location, Black, brown, actually a multiracial group was together in that same exact location that same day, just earlier on in the day. Also peaceful, but they got maced. The cops were in riot gear to begin with. I'm sure they went home feeling concerned for their safety, felt their voices were unheard, because how could you feel heard when you're being met with that kind of violence? And this is the racial divide that people feel. There's two different realities. There's an illusion of what the other side is like, and that feeds into the lie that Black and brown people and people that are in diverse groups are violent. There was also a protest in Gary and Whiting. Gary is a mostly underfunded city. Whiting is more affluent. The Whiting protests surprisingly had a really large turnout. It was about, our estimates were 260 people. They had, they were chanting supporting words. The general feel of it was that they felt bad for the victims of racist police, and it was very supportive. And I think we reached them by helping some people realize that they themselves are victims of capitalism, also through the obvious ones like classism and sexism, ableism, even racism sometimes. They are victims of it, and that's a way that they can help join our party, help them realize that they should be in our party. The ones in Gary was a completely different atmosphere, deep-set frustration and pain and sadness and anger towards the police. It seemed like everybody had a personal experience with racism and classism and capitalism. There was a lot of pain. And these people were being told that they could change everything just by voting. Just go vote. Very reformist attitudes that doesn't really encourage anyone, doesn't really changes nothing. It doesn't leave people feeling empowered. And we've been able to reach them by our stance in fighting back, and that revolution is necessary. Is Jay on the line right now?
Yeah, I'm trying to get him up. Give me 1 second.
Sure. So our next speaker is going to be Jay. He's a comrade of ours.
All right, sorry about the delay. Just give me a moment here.
No issue.
Okay. All right. You're up, man. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Shout out to my comrades and everyone that's tuned in today. I'm just going to give a little talk here on the history of the police under capitalism and their role in capitalist society. So, to protect and serve the civilian population or to maintain social control under the capitalist system. As communists in PLP, we fight for the Marxist historical materialist analysis that police forces that developed as we know them with the rise of industrial capitalism were never neutral enforcers of bourgeois democracy. They have always been at their core racist hitmen for the capitalist bosses and defenders of the status quo, private property, and wealth stolen from the working masses through exploitation. They are at the cutting edge of enforcing the monopoly on state violence by the ruling class. So just to keep things kind of short, we're just going to talk about development of the police in the United States, but you can assume it follows a similar trajectory in other countries with the rise of capitalism there. One of the earliest documented full-time police forces in the U.S. was in the city of Boston in 1838. Although it was established through taxing the public, its main function was to protect goods shipped into the port city and defend the private property and profits of the local merchant bosses there. In the southern United States around the same period, the first organized police patrols had the explicit purpose of tracking down escaped enslaved Africans and returning them to bondage and labor. In the post-Civil War period, in Reconstruction after the formal abolition of chattel slavery, these racist posses merely switched strategies to brutally enforcing segregation and terrorizing black communities for the benefit of the Southern capitalists. Back in major northern cities around this time too, booms in industry in the 19th century drew waves of immigrant workers from Europe who labored and lived in hellish conditions. These brutal and deadly conditions contrasted sharply with the obscene wealth enjoyed by the capitalist class. Labor unrest and strikes were the norm. Police departments were further institutionalized, funded, and armed by the capitalist class to break strikes, as well as divide, terrorize, and control these immigrant working class communities. By the early 20th century, the Great Migration saw a mass internal movement of Black workers from the mostly agricultural South to northern and western cities as they searched for work. Like the European immigrant workers before them, they were subjected to intense exploitation, dilapidated housing, and racist discrimination and violence from police and white workers alike. Throughout the 20th century, and still in the present day, it has been Black workers who have experienced the worst of domestic state violence by the racist killer cops. But at the same time, it is the same Black working class who have led some of the most militant fight back against this racist violence, shutting down major U.S. cities and exposing the vulnerable underbelly of the capitalist system. This bold example of working class leadership is still apparent today, as hundreds of cities and towns are rocked by the collective outrage of millions of workers over the murder of George Floyd and many others. Those of us in PLP have thrown ourselves headlong into this mass anti-racist struggle, just as we always have since our formation as a party. But as we fight for justice alongside our working class sisters and brothers, we know that the arrest and sentencing of a few killer cops or reform of police departments will never rid our class from the racist violence inflicted by the capitalist profit system. Capitalism, a system based on maximizing profit, will always have a need to divide workers to begin fighting back against our common enemy, the bosses. Systemic racist discrimination and violence, vile sexism, and poisonous nationalism are some of their most effective and deadly methods. The whole institution of policing under capitalism is designed to protect this profit system at all costs, and all the unemployment, inequality, poverty, and addiction that inevitably come with it. Changing the color or gender of those at top of these institutions will never change this reality. The problem is capitalism. Calls to defund or even abolish police or prisons are empty demands unless we're talking about taking aim squarely at all class society and making plans to uproot it via a mass revolutionary movement and a leading communist party. A communist society ran by and in the interest of the international working class is the only way to free ourselves from racist police murder and to achieve justice for George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and countless other victims of capitalist state violence. A communist society led by a mass PLP will organize a society that is not based on money and profits, but rather on working class need. The social conditions under capitalism that give rise to widespread inequality, want, and unrest will be eliminated, as will the need for violent institutions such as police forces, prisons, and jails. And with that, I'll transition over to my comrade James.
Afternoon, everybody. Really great. So many people. In. I also got an honor to go to Minneapolis a week ago, and it was a great experience for so many of us and for so many people in Minneapolis. I remember before we left, there was a thread going around saying, organizers in Minneapolis said, "Don't come here. We don't want help." And I think in the party, we know that that's typically trash and an analysis that comes from folks who are not on the ground. And so when we got to Minneapolis, that was not the sentiment we got at all. And I think you can, from the original video that kicked off this webinar, you could hear the young man saying, "Yes, come. Help us fight," because they were the cutting edge of the fight against capitalism and fascism. And the bosses brought in reinforcements and the working class needed reinforcements. And so we came to Minneapolis with our revolutionary line, and the working class there is very, very polite. When we would sell challenge, they would say, "Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing this." And it wasn't in a condescending or trying to poke fun. It was legit appreciation. Folks started asking us, well, do you have chapters here? We said, no, not yet. That's what we're here for, to expand this understanding and to expand this party so that we can make a revolution. And so they started giving us contact information. And we've been keeping in contact with folks. But one of the main things that we brought to Minneapolis was the revolutionary line of Progressive Labor Party. And we told them, rebellions are great. We support you. You have to fight. You have to teach us to fight. We have to fight together. But rebellions have to evolve into revolutions. We've had rebellions in the past, and the bosses have the same playbook every time. As soon as they can get the majority of the workers to calm down, they bring in the preachers, they bring in the politicians, and they bring in the philanthropies to talk about peace, to get back to the old way. And so the line that we brought was that we need a party. You need a party, a revolutionary party that can give you the tools, give you the mechanism to destroy the system. And so when we talked about that, Comrade Stalin, he talked about this after the revolution in Russia, and he said the party's principal task is to win the working class, to be on the side of the working class. And that's what we were doing in Minneapolis, to help build working class solidarity. Then he said, we have to be one to the side of the working class. And what that means is being one to overthrowing the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, being one to destroy capitalism, to seize state power so that they can't come back and try to institute more exploitation, more racism, more sexism. And so then we talked about the party being an instrument for the working class, for us to be able to organize and to fight and to ultimately defeat the capitalists and to organize a new society based on communist principles. Revolution, we heard people talking about, the beauty of Minneapolis because it was organic, and that is true. But revolutions, unlike rebellions, don't happen organically. Revolutions are not abstract events that you fight for. Revolutions are the result of years of struggle and commitment by a revolutionary party to destroy the existing state, to destroy the domination of the capitalists over the working class. And revolution is the instrument to get our class to a communist society, a society where we produce based on our commitment to our brothers and sisters, and we receive what we need because we need it, not because we can afford it. A party ensures that this new world and new way of life can be created and sustained. PLP is our party, it's your party. It is the party of every worker who hates racism, who hates sexism, who knows that a better world is possible. And so we ask everyone listening, we asked everyone in Minneapolis to join Progressive Labor Party, because this is the way that we get to the world that we all deserve, that our class deserves, and that our class needs. So I think we're gonna open up for Q&A. Excited to hear people's thoughts and questions. Yeah, in the chat, I see there's a discussion about hijacking the movement. And it's interesting, a friend of mine, he's moved up into the elite of the ruling class in the nonprofit sector. And he called me Friday before we went to Minneapolis. We went to Minneapolis on Saturday morning. He called me Friday, he said, Chris, I know that they hijack movements, but I've never been a part of it. So what does that mean? And he said he was on a text thread with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Angela Davis, and a few other kind of like older radicals, and then some new younger radicals. And they were preparing to go on MSNBC that day to talk about Minneapolis, even though none of them had been in Minneapolis. I think there was one organizer from there. But then I said, so what are you going to talk about since you don't know? And he was telling me, he said, look, they've already written out my script. The whole script is going to be about how the rebellion in Minneapolis was led and organized by queer women of color, even though that was totally untrue. If anyone has seen the videos, it was a multiracial, men, women, everything under the sun working together, fighting the bosses. That's who burned down that 3rd precinct. It wasn't just, queer women of color, but that was the narrative that they were going to put on the news that day. And that's the narrative they were going to push, because now they need to fund somebody so that they can squash this worker anger. So when we talk about hijacking, the hijacking is always going to be on the side of the bosses. Whenever workers fight, any other worker that goes to support is called solidarity. When you go to try to put power back into the hands of the capitalists, that's the hijacking. Those are the people that we should be attacking and making sure that they're not able to do what they want to do. How do we
break through the negative connotations connected to communism?
Comrade?
I think through example. I mean, bosses have their media, they have their press. Communism is their #1 mortal enemy. So they're going to throw everything they got at it. And I think as the movement rebuilds itself in strength and size, you're going to see that kind of similar vehement attack. It's nothing new. I think the way we really challenge it is, one, by knowing our history, but also the example we set when we go into these spaces, these struggles, and present ourselves as a multiracial, international, multi-generational party. I think that's in it for the long term. Is it in it to hijack it? Is it in it to dilute it into dead end reforms or what have you? I think, that's the best way to win people to sympathize and eventually join with us is the example we set of fearless working class leadership and uncompromising principles with revolution.
Agree. Another question is, how do we respond to people who condemn the violence of uprisings? So I think there's young people in these memes are great. I've seen a lot of good memes about, you can remember one question about joining mass movements, being involved with something about lifetime struggle and mass movements. I feel like I remember a couple words like that.
Yeah, I think that was the next one.
Okay, what do you got on that? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we definitely we have to be involved in the mass movement. I think that's what workers are. I think that's where we get engaged in class struggle. I think that's where we learn how to fight this system. Obviously, we know that reforms won't get it done. Reforms won't get the society that we want, right? That it'll never get us, the schools that all of our students deserve and things like that. But it is where we meet our students. It is where we meet other teachers. It is where we meet other folks in the community, other workers in our neighborhoods that are ready to fight back against racism, sexism, and all of the other things that the bosses use to exploit us. So yeah, I think we have to be involved in mass struggles, in class struggle, mass organizations. I think we have to figure out how to get communist politics out, even in the midst of those things. So yeah, I think as this time right now is showing us, right, we have to be, in these mass organizations, because these mass organizations are, on the front lines and have a lot of workers that are fighting back.
I see this one about Black people have been struggling for over 400 years, so we are all too familiar with struggling. I agree that we, Black people, will need the support from many different sources. But this time around, we need to be able to write our own narrative. Yeah, I feel like I've heard that a lot. And so, a couple things come to mind. One is, what is the Black narrative? Because we're not a homogenous group of people. And so how is there a narrative? I think the other piece about that is there's no Black liberation if all workers aren't liberated. And there's no Latin liberation if all workers aren't liberated. Our liberations are not separate things that each of us can, attain at a particular point in time. All of our exploitation, all of our oppression is connected and combined into the one system of capitalism. They decide how each of us is exploited and oppressed at different moments in time. And so it's going to be imperative that we have multiracial working class unity to break that. The other thing is, I'm not going to follow a Jesse Jackson. I'm not going to follow Al Sharpton. I'm not going to follow a Farrakhan. I'm not going to follow any of these Black capitalists. I'm not going to follow Michael Jordan or LeBron James. Just because they're Black doesn't mean that they're on our side. All skin folk and kinfolk. And so I'd rather follow, and I will follow, those with a better political line, those fighting for the world that I want. And so, yeah, this thing around Black narratives and I think it leads us to the enemy's camp.
I think so. One of the next questions was, and I think a few of them kind of touch on this question of violence. So yeah, I think that, or the need, right? How do we explain talking about violence with our base? I think that I think for me, I used to be one of the biggest pacifists on the face of this earth, probably, right? And I think that one of the biggest lessons, I don't always think you can win folks ideologically from pacifism or things like that. Sometimes you may, but I think for me, one of the biggest ways I learned that pacifism, right, nonviolence wouldn't get us anywhere was just being at demonstrations myself. I think we have to give folks, when folks come to demonstrations or when folks get activated and get involved and they see people are marching peacefully and they still get pepper sprayed and stuff like that, right? I think this past week in Hammond, people were, this protest was, they made sure this protest was peaceful, the folks who were organizing it. They put peace, nonviolence in every single thing that they posted about this event, and the police still pepper sprayed them. The police still tear gassed them, right? So I think that when you understand that that's your enemy, that's who you're up against, right? That your enemy, the folks you're up against, will constantly use violence to suppress you, to keep you in place. I think we have to understand and come to the realization that we have to use it as well, not indiscriminately, but against them, very focused on against the bosses who control the police, who control the military, who control all of these different things. We have to be very focused in understanding that we have to use, that we will have to use violence against them, and that we will have to organize in the military. So that's another important part about that, right? That we have to organize folks who are in the National Guard and the military, so we can tell them that, it's in their common interest to unite with us, that they should turn their guns around and put it on the ruling class.
I think the thing about violence also, if we're not talking about violence and using it against the capitalists, then we're leading our class to suicide. Organizations that think that they can achieve this thing or any type of freedom through nonviolence are literally leading people to the hospital or to the graveyard, because the state, the boss's state, has proven time and time again. Even the reason we're having this forum is because their state had no problem with putting their knee on a man's neck for 8 minutes until the life fled from his body. They have no problem denying children food across the world and letting them starve to death. This is the enemy that we are up against. And anything less than violence is suicide. And so we have to understand that this violence is a necessary tool to get the world that we want. And everyone won't have to be on the front lines with a gun, but they will have to play a part in this movement, which means communications, it means food, it means all types of things. It means organizing on jobs, it means organizing in churches, but they will have to be one to support the violence that a party needs to enact to suppress the exploitation and slavery that capitalism puts us in. I saw something about white privilege. You see that? How do you counter the argument about white privilege and not, quote unquote, telling people of color how they should fight their battles?
I think if I can dive in, I think I've been a part of a couple of interesting conversations this week just around this word. Like, so I guess I won't exactly address the whole white privilege thing, but I think this conversation, this question gets to it, is this question of allyship versus being a comrade, right? So I think that a lot of organizers who I know who are white are really one to this idea of obviously first white privilege, but then also allyship. And I always tell them I completely reject both, right? And on this topic of allyship, I always say I don't need an ally, right? An ally is somebody who allies change sides all the time, right? In this fight against capitalism, in this fight against oppression and exploitation, and against racism, sexism, all these different things, we need comrades, right? I think we need folks who are going to be in the fight with us, who we build relationships with, who we trust. And I think that this idea of white privilege and things like that, at times, I think that's what kind of built up this whole idea and concept of allyship and things. So I don't know if you want to expound a little bit too.
Yeah, I think this idea of white privilege is very much based on the misunderstanding of why oppression exists. And so when people talk about white privilege, it's all about the individual. How can you as a white worker somehow understand how racism is in your interest? How can you then try to use that privilege to make my life or another Black worker's life somewhat less hectic? But it's divorced from the understanding that these oppressions exist to enhance exploitation, to enhance the amount of surplus value that the bosses can extract from our labor. And when you take it from that objective material reality and put it on the subjective individual, then you can't change anything. The best that these people with these privilege arguments have is deny your privilege. Well, first they want you to accept it, then they want you to deny it, right? Redistribute it. So then we see these protests where I just saw it yesterday. They were like, enact the white shield. And so they told all the white folks to come to the front as if that was going to stop the police from whooping that ass. And the police did exactly what they typically do and beat on everyone in the protests. And so I think you juxtapose that with these racists who just been protesting with AR-15s and all these automatic weapons on these Capitol steps. They have privilege because they are working for the state. They are given extra benefits because they work in the interests of the capitalists. And so now we see when white workers are standing up against racism, against capitalism, they're treated like everybody else. And so, I think we have to continue trying to point these things out, just like we have to point out the illusion of like the kneeling cop as the good cop.
I see one question that says, how can we get more worker organizations like unions to help build this movement? I think one is obviously we have to be in them, right? We have to be leaders in them. We have to be vocal in them. We have to try our best to sharpen the contradictions in them. So this week, a union that I'm in, we me and another fellow coworker, we really agitated around the fact that right now, our students and stuff like that are on the front line and being beaten and brutalized and attacked. And where are we at, right? We have to get in that fight with them. So I think that we have to be vocal. I think we have to organize. I think we have to sharpen these contradictions of, fortunately my union is, claims to be anti-racist, right? So I have something to stand on there, but then you can't be anti-racist and not be in this fight, not be on the front lines when, workers are putting it on the line. So yeah, I think we have to be vocal. I think we have to be bold. I think we have to not be afraid to criticize, and I think we have to organize and build relationships with other folks in the union, because then we have that support to kind of make these more radical demands.
Says, can you talk a little bit about the decision of a young person just coming out of high school and thinking about joining the party but unsure? I think we both have some experience on this front. You actually have some personal experience, I'm assuming. Glenn, you want to talk about that?
About becoming, can you restate the question?
A young person joining the party but being a little unsure.
Yeah, I think it's going to take some time. I think it takes time. I think folks have to, be patient. Those who are trying to organize students and things like that, you have to be extremely patient doing this work. And I think for me, a key component is always trying to get folks to be involved in class struggle. I think that's one of, obviously we want to be having the theoretical conversations that are sharpening those contradictions. But when we're just having these theoretical conversations and it's not applicable or it's not being put in practice or folks can see these things, I think that there's a disconnect there. So I think we have to be, putting folks in class struggle. Like a lot of the biggest lessons I learned when I had my criticisms of communism or my criticisms of violence or nonviolence, it was when I was in these different demonstrations and things like that. And I saw to the extent of which the bosses would go to protect their system. It was when I was, being involved in different mutual aid type things before COVID, where I was able to kind of see, okay, workers can run society, workers can make decisions. We don't need the bosses to do these things, right? So I think it's about, being patient, but also, sharpening those contradictions through getting folks involved in class struggle.
Yeah. I just give a practical example of, what happens. It takes time. I think, in Chicago, we've been having a lot of folks come back around the party. So former students of mine who told me, last week, hey, I wasn't ready, but now I'm ready. So it's that patience and urgency. And I think these young folks are feeling the urgency more than previous generations. They've been through 2 economic recessions. They've been at war their entire life in this country. Unemployment, it's like the illusion of the American dream is just out the window for them. They see through it. Mm-hmm. So I think we have a lot to look forward to with this generation. Last week, we had a study group and we're studying the state and revolution. And it was led by 2 brand new comrades who both are under 24. It was 3 or 4 more younger folks, all under 25, who were participating in the discussion. I think now I'm an older person, so I just kind of sat back as much as possible and just let them discuss these very advanced political ideologies, these advanced political points, and they are getting it. And so, it's very encouraging that our party has such confidence in young people that we teach Marx, we teach the classics, we teach, all these important points that our class needs to understand so that they can take power, so that we can take power one day. And I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing with young people right now. Mm. someone from New York made a good point. So I'm just going to read that because I can't see the next question. It says, at a rally in New York City, a young Black organizer, not in PLP, stated or called for multiracial unity by saying, quote, "We don't see white people as allies. That's not enough. We need you in the trenches fighting with us." It shows that there are young leaders that don't agree with the idea of using white people as shields because they have privilege. Yes, good point. And I think we saw that in Minneapolis over and over again. I mean, you didn't even hear the term privilege or ally when you were on those battle lines, because those young people weren't associated with identity politics movement. They hadn't been, in the colleges that teach you all this stuff. This privilege argument is very much centered in academia. And so you get a lot of these young kind of non-for-profit associated or, young organizers really pushing this ideology. But when we were in Ferguson, you didn't hear it either until those organizers came. When we were in Pascagoula, Mississippi, working with shipbuilders during their strike, you didn't hear that. It was Black and white workers on that line together fighting the boss. And I think, to Glenn's point, class struggle will always illuminate the contradictions that the bosses put forward. This thing around allies versus, comrades, this thing about good cops versus bad cops, this notion of good politicians versus bad politicians, all these demonstrations that have been happening across the country where the police have probably been the most violent are democratically run cities and states. And so, as much as the Democrats try to talk trash about Trump, who is a racist gutter piece of shit, they're doing the exact same thing. They're telling him don't be racist while they attack young workers viciously in all these cities. When we're in Minneapolis, I never seen cops just be that vicious. When we were marching and they hopped out, there was no warnings. There was no, get on the street or get out the street. They just immediately started firing and relentlessly. There's videos where people were in their homes watching and the police started shooting at them. And so they were very much out for pain. It was not about, their fantasy of law and order. It was about hurting people, particularly these young people, to try to break their spirit because they were not scared. They were not afraid of them anymore.
I think I saw about looks like it's a teacher from the East Coast talking about cops out of schools. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a big demand and push here in Chicago too. I think particularly after Minneapolis school system terminate their contract. So yeah, I think we'll definitely hear it. I think we'll definitely hear the bosses start to co-opt some of these things, right? In LA, the mayor there said that, they will defund the police, right? So I think we will see these liberals and things like that start to try to co-opt the movement, cool folks down by making promises and guarantees that most likely they won't keep, or even if they do, they'll find 1,000,000,001 loopholes to put in it, right? But I think let's even say they do. I think that obviously, as communists, we have to be a part of the struggles to get police out of our schools, but we have to also be explaining to folks that, getting the police out of our schools isn't enough. That we have to get the police off the streets, right? And ultimately, we have to take state power. That we have to organize to smash the boss of state, so that there is no police in all of these different things. So I think defunding the police isn't enough. Just getting them out of school is not enough, right? We should be a part of these struggles to make sure these things happen, but we have to be making sure we're talking to our base and the folks around us to fight and push for more than that.
Sorry, good question. I didn't want to overlook it. It says, can you compare our critique of identity politics with our fight for the leadership of Black workers, immigrant workers, and women workers, etc. Thoughts?
You can get
Can you compare our critique of identity politics with our fight for the leadership of Black workers and immigrant workers? I think that's a really good question, because I think the party has had this line since the 60s, late 60s, that Black workers are a key revolutionary force, key to doing, achieving the world that we want. And, you know, it's 40, 50 years before Black Lives Matter movement, right? And it's not saying what I hear in the mass media, like Black workers, black girl magic, Black boy magic, whatever, that Black people are not superheroes. Our line is that Black workers, because of the nature of the rise of capitalism, so being joined with the rise of racism, and that these two vicious systems were born together, that ending racism is the key to ending capitalism. And based on racism, Black workers historically, presently, and in the future will always be at the bottom of the totem pole. And this is not just in the United States, this is around the world. We see it in China now, where they're attacking African workers. We've seen it in South Korea, we've seen it in Germany, we've seen it in places where you didn't even know Black workers were there. Anti-Black racism is the critical component of this system. And Black workers have always resisted and fought unparalleled to anyone. And I think the leadership that Black workers give to the world's working class continues to be seen. This murder of George Floyd and the subsequent rebellion led by the workers in Minneapolis has spread around the world. And we don't see that happen in Ferguson, that happened after Baltimore. We see the world looking to Black workers fight, because I think the working class around the world understands anti-Black racism is such a crucial force, a crucial tool for the capitalist class, and that we have to smash it if we're gonna ever get rid of the system. And I think it also, and so understanding that special expectation that exists for Black workers, for women workers, means that we have to fight even harder to learn from those workers, that the oppression that they face is so acute and so particular that they understand this system in a way that lots of us can't, or in different ways. And so when we can harness the expertise, the energy, the fight of those workers, it makes our party stronger. It makes the working class stronger. And so, it's not saying that any of these workers have superpowers or whatever else the liberals say, but that we have so much to learn from our class of different, whatever identity group they want to throw at us. But for me, that's what I think is the difference between our line and the liberal line around Black workers or women workers or queer workers.